Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Richard Ryan, and I am Senior Washington Correspondent for the Detroit News and President of the National Press Club. I'd like to welcome club members and their guests in the audience today, and those of you who are watching on C-SPAN or listening to this program on National Public Radio. The video archive of today's luncheon is provided by Connect Live and is available through the National Press Club website at press.org. National Press Club luncheons are also carried live by many sites on the World Wide Web. Press Club members may also access transcripts of our luncheons at our website. Non-members may purchase transcripts, audio, and videotapes by calling 1-888-343-1940. Before introducing our head table, I'd like to remind our members of future speakers. On Tuesday, April the 10th, Joel Klein, who was the former Assistant Attorney General for the Antitrust Division in the U.S. Department of Justice, will speak on antitrust enforcement in the global economy. On Wednesday, April the 11th, His Majesty King Abdullah of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan will discuss Jordan and its role in the Middle East and its relationship with the United States. And on Thursday, April the 12th, Charles Rossetti, Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, will be our guest at the club. And for those of you who are keeping count, that's exactly 4 days before income taxes are due. If you have any questions for our speaker, please write them on the cards that are provided at your table, and please write in your best handwriting and send them up to me, and I will ask as many as time permits. And I'd now like to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly when their names are called. Please hold your applause until all head table guests are introduced. From your right and my left, Sumana Chatterjee of Knight Ridder Newspapers, Kathy Kiley of USA Today, and Chairman of the National Press Club's Scholarship Committee, Jennifer Corbett of Dow Jones, Charlie Orenstein of the Dallas Morning News, Martin Luther King III, President of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Frank Ockerfer, co-chairman of the Speakers Committee and a former president of the National Press Club. And skipping over our speaker for a moment, Bill McCarran, U.S. Newswire and Speakers Committee member who organized today's luncheon. Thank you, Bill. Guy Dowd, 1986 National Teacher of the Year from Brainerd, Minnesota. Judy Kronholtz of the Wall Street Journal. Thomas Fleming, 1992 National Teacher of the Year from Ann Arbor, Michigan. And Jack Nelson of the Los Angeles Times. Thank you. Imagine you had millions of dollars. What would you do with it? Buy a new house, a couple of cars, take a trip around the world? Well, our guest today, Ted Forstmann, has several millions of dollars, and he is using much of it to further his dream of helping educate America's children and to dramatically change what he considers to be the country's outdated educational system. Along with John Walton of Walmart, Mr. Forstmann has established the Children's Scholarship Fund to provide monies to help educate the children of low-income families. He has put up $100 million of his own money for the program, which allows parents to choose what school, private, parochial, or public, to send their children. In 1999, the Children's Scholarship Fund provided school tuition for more than 40,000 kids, but parents of more than 1.2 million low-income children had applied for the grants. Mr. Forstmann wants to change public education as we know it. He thinks our educational system is a monopolistic one that leaves parents out of the decision-making and shortchanges their children. He recently launched Parents in Charge, a nonpartisan organization dedicated to promoting a competitive educational environment in which parents are in charge of their children's education and all children have an equal access to a quality education. And Mr. Forstmann is willing to put up his own money to prove his point. And he certainly got the money. According to Forbes magazine, Mr. Forstmann ranks among the 300 wealthiest Americans. He is the founding partner of Forstmann Little Co, a New York-based private investment firm. Since its founding in 1978, the firm has made 28 acquisitions and significant equity investments. One of the best known was the acquisition of Gulfstream Aerospace. He purchased it for $800 million. He sold it 8 years later for $6 billion. Mr. Forstmann has been involved in helping kids for more than 2 decades. He began his involvement 20 years ago with the Big Brothers program. Since then, he helped establish a medical program for war-injured children in Bosnia. He has worked to relieve the plight of South African street children by helping provide them education, shelter, and medical care. He is the legal guardian of 2 such children. He has helped establish 2 camps for seriously ill children. He joined with tennis pro Andrea Jaeger to set up the Silver Lining Ranch in Colorado. He teamed with Paul Newman to create a camp in Florida for children with cancer and other life-threatening diseases. Now 60, Mr. Forstmann is a bachelor who has never had children of his own. A close associate said that his dedication to helping kids is based on a belief that he has been lucky in life and he wants to give something back to society. He has always had a place in his heart for kids who have had a rough deal, the associate said. Back in New York, Mr. Forstmann briefly toyed with the idea of running for the Senate last year against Hillary Rodham Clinton. But he may have been talked out of that by his business partner, Erskine Bowles, a former chief of staff to Hillary's husband. He is frequently in New York gossip columns, most recently for squiring around movie actress Elizabeth Hurley. Mr. Forstmann recently purchased the movie rights to the classic sports novel, The Boys of Summer, a story about his boyhood heroes, the old Brooklyn Dodgers. No date has been set for production. He is only going to make 1 movie in his life, an associate said, and he is going to do it right. The Wall Street Journal once described Mr. Forstmann as, quote, a man who vents his opinions vociferously, nurses grudges obsessively, and pursues pet causes passionately. So please join me in welcoming Ted Forstmann to the National Press Club, who is here today to pursue one of his pet causes.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, especially for the first 80% of that. Very nice. And the one thing is that whatever I'm worth, it was last year. And, but 3 years ago, here at the National Press Club, I announced the formation of the Children's Scholarship Fund, which has just been referred to. It has exceeded our fondest hopes, and we have been able to help more than 40,000 low-income children escape failing public schools and seek a quality education in the school of their choice. Personally, I have evolved from a person with simple charitable objectives into someone who has become painfully aware of the real facts of the education system in America. And so today, I would like to share with you what I have learned and to tell you, yes, the unvarnished truth as I see it. I'm going to suggest to you that we do not have a real education debate in this country at all. I'm going to suggest to you that what we have are competing ideas for tinkering with the same old system. And I'm going to suggest to you that what we're really like is the famous mythical emperor's loyal subjects debating whether his hat is red or his boots are green, when in fact he isn't wearing anything at all. Now, I'm aware that the little boy who first had the temerity to say out loud that the emperor had no clothes was given a pretty hard time. And I guess I've got to get ready for that. In fact, in the early days of the Children's Scholarship Fund, an education bureaucrat actually called me un-American on a television news show. Worse than that, he called me a bozo. But at any rate, an un-American bozo was what he called me. Un-American for helping 40,000 underprivileged kids. It made no sense to me. It got me thinking. And it got me thinking in this context, what really is American and what really is un-American, after all? Well, to me, America is a democratic capitalist country. To me, that's very basic. And democratic means you have choices. It means people are free to choose all sorts of things, from who to vote for, to how to pray, to what to read, even to drive multi-ton vehicles at up to 65 miles an hour. Capitalism would imply to me that multiple suppliers get to compete on a relatively level playing field for the business of these free people who we call customers. But I want you to notice that in K through 12 education, not a single word that I have just spoken applies. Not a single word. We don't allow people to choose where their children go to school, or who teaches them, or what they learn, and we have one supplier and essentially no competition. So obviously that's monopolistic, and given the fact that payment for the product is mandatory through taxes, and consumption of the product is compulsory through attendance laws, I would suggest to you that that's about as powerful a monopoly as has ever existed anywhere in the world. And by the way, we passed the Sherman Antitrust Act outlawing monopolies in 1890, and we did so because we came to a national consensus that monopolies produce a low-quality product at a high price, and that's another fact. So here's where I begin to feel really like the little kid looking at the naked emperor. Because when it comes to the so-called education debate, all we really ask of ourselves is what kind of monopoly should we have? Should we have one with longer hours, or should we have one with smaller class sizes, or more buildings, or what? No one asks what seems to me to be the totally obvious question, which is, why do we have a monopoly in K through 12 education at all? Why, in a country that is both democratic and capitalist, and that parenthetically has a university system that is highly competitive and the envy of the world, does none of this apply to K through 12 education? Well, there must be a reason. We are told that America was founded on a system of government schools, and that therefore they are a fundamental underpinning of our society. This is completely, totally false. In fact, our founders consciously chose to base the country on an open system of education, one in which any legitimate supplier could enter the market and compete, and parents could choose from among them. Competition kept quality high and costs low. It was not until 100 years after our founding that things changed, when Horace Mann convinced the Massachusetts legislature to start a government-operated system in that state. A little history. Both utopianism and bigotry played a role. Mann promised that if Massachusetts adopted his ideas, quote, 9/10 of the crimes in the penal code will become obsolete. But in reality, both he and his followers were concerned about the large numbers of Irish Catholic immigrants entering the country, and felt that government schools were the best way to homogenize them, his word, not mine, within the broader Anglo-Saxon Protestant society. Parents who once had authority over their children's education had it taken away, sometimes at the point of a bayonet. And the whole thing might not even have survived had it not been adopted and heavily sponsored by major industrialists like Carnegie, Rockefeller, Ford, and Astor, who believed that a standardized bureaucratic system could turn out compliant workers to staff their factories, oil fields, and coal mines. Okay, so it turns out that the system we have is in fact the opposite of what the founders had in mind. But if it's a good system, maybe it only needs to be changed in some way or other. We're told repeatedly that more money is needed to make the system work. Dozens of studies have tried to show a connection between money and learning without any success at all. In fact, we have increased spending 14-fold in inflation-adjusted terms since 1920. Yet our schools, by just about every conceivable measure, from test scores to basic safety, continue to perform at a very mediocre level. Now, that should really not come as a surprise. I think you all know, without my telling you, that no monopoly in history has ever been reformed by raising its prices, or for that matter, expanding office hours, building more office space, or even, as was recently suggested, by making its customers wear uniforms. Now we have a new administration. President Bush and Secretary Page are in charge, and I believe we are fortunate that they are, because they bring impressive credentials and the best of intentions to bear. As you know, they have proposed instituting standards and accountability, and that, I believe, is very salutary. Every good CEO taking over a business would institute standards and demand accountability. But they still would have to compete against other suppliers. And so I submit that standards and accountability, while beneficial for the organization you are in charge of, are in no way the equal of or a substitute for competition and freedom of choice in the country as a whole. Ladies and gentlemen, we are paying an enormous price by being so willfully myopic about all of this. By refusing to open this system up, we continue to perpetuate a kind of educational apartheid. While more affluent families can buy themselves better options, either by sending their children to private schools or moving out to more expensive suburbs with better public schools, poor parents are stuck with no option other than government schools that can't teach or even protect their children. The result? 70% of our inner-city fourth graders are unable to read at even a basic level, and that's according to the Department of Education. To illustrate a point I made just a moment ago, right here in Washington, D.C., in our nation's capital, we have the highest per-pupil education spending and the lowest performance of any urban school district in America. Normally, we would expect children to learn more as they advance through schools. But this system has managed to turn that expectation on its head. According to a report issued by the District of Columbia Financial Responsibility and Management Assistance Authority in November 1996, quote, "The longer students stay in the district's public school system, the less likely they are to succeed educationally." It was this kind of inequality that convinced me 3 years ago to start the Children's Scholarship Fund. John Walton and I think, as you know, pooled together $200 million, and we offered some 40,000 scholarships. Our offices were overwhelmed by the response. We received 1.25 million applications from all over the country, sent in some cities from as many as a third of the eligible population. Now consider that these were all from people who were already getting the product for nothing and who had an average yearly income of no more than $20,000 a year, and yet they were willing to put up $1,000 per child in order to take advantage of these partial scholarships. And some people today still seriously suggest that parents don't care or aren't qualified to be in charge of their children's education. Well, I think I have news for you. I think it's big news. We commissioned the SWR Whitman Group and the Wirthlin Group to produce bipartisan polling on this subject. And the results, to me, are both eye-opening and very confirmatory. 69% of those polled believed parents, as opposed to government, should set the standards for educational performance. 72% agreed that our educational system would be improved if there were a multitude of suppliers. And 82% believe parents should be able to choose their children's school freely. There's a lot more to these polls, and you have the full survey and methodology in the press kits that we've handed out. So I think we verified what parents want. For a lot of reasons, I also wanted to know what teachers thought. So here today are, and I'd just like to read, this is a sampling of teachers and educators that joined our advisory board. Polly Broussard of the Associated Professional Educators of Louisiana, John Taylor Gatto, 4 times New York State Teacher of the Year, Ernestine Sanders of the Cornerstone Schools in Detroit, Michigan, Michael Feinberg of KIPP Academies in Houston, Guy Dowd of Staples, Minnesota, and Thomas Fleming of Michigan, both of whom, as you've heard, are national public school teachers. All of them, plus 11,000 more teachers, signed on to a statement of principles which says the following. 11,000 teachers. 1, we believe parents and guardians, not government, have primary responsibility for and authority over their children's education. 2, we believe children are the reason for a system of education and that system's needs must never take precedence over the needs of children. 3, we believe teaching is a profession and good teachers deserve recognition and compensation based on their performance. 4, we believe government currently controls the vast majority of schools in this country. Our system of education would be improved by a multitude of providers as opposed to a government monopoly. Now that's 11,000 teachers talking. And by the way, not only do 11,000 teachers support these principles, so do 2 secretaries of education, both of whom who were kind enough to join our board, Bill Bennett and Joe Califano. Interestingly, a third, the current Secretary of Education, Rod Page, speaking at a conference I also addressed last month, declared this, quote, the idea of a public school monopoly is dead. It needs to be relegated to the Smithsonian. And he also said to me, Ted, the arguments against your position are in fact all bogus. The support of thousands of teachers and millions of parents is why I'm here today to launch Parents in Charge, which, as you've heard, is a bipartisan organization which advocates the following: that every child, regardless of race, creed, or household income, must have an equal opportunity to receive a quality education, that parents have a prior right to determine what sort of education is given to their child, and that therefore parents have a right to choose where their children attend school and have a say in who teaches them and what they learn. We have created Parents in Charge to advance these principles and to educate America in a national campaign as to the real problems and real possibilities in education. Because while we know that monopolies don't work, we also really do know what does work. Freedom of choice and competition work. Listen to what my fellow board member and former White House Chief of Staff Erskine Bowles had to say, quote, there has never been an industry, there has never been a company, there has never been a product that has not been improved by competition. Now, we have an example of this even within education itself. It's our system of higher education, and it is the envy of the world. In this system, consumers are free to choose among all sorts of different options, including state-run and even religious institutions. And suppliers are free to set up schools, compete on a fairly level playing field, and even, after meeting certain basic certifications, receive government funding, which, by the way, at this level is not considered school aid, but called student aid. This kind of freedom for consumers and freedom for suppliers produces high quality, innovation, and specialization to meet a diverse universe of students' needs. They can go at night, they can go part-time, or even online. They can pursue general studies or a specific discipline, and if they're not satisfied, they don't have to sit there for 4 years. They can transfer to a school that better suits their needs. For the same kind of thing to occur in our primary and secondary schools, we've got to have equality of opportunity, not just for the consumer, but for the supplier. And it's no good to say that families are free to choose their children's schools when there are no schools to choose from. This was brought home to me in a very sad way a year ago when we offered to fill every single empty seat in New York's private and parochial schools. We were able to help 3,400 children, which is the good news. The bad news, there are 162,000 children still waiting to be helped on the waiting list, and there's nowhere for them to go. There's no supply because suppliers do not have an equal opportunity to compete. How can they possibly when their customer has to pay twice, first in terms of taxes, then in terms of tuition? So no wonder the majority of existing suppliers are either those who are willing to forgo making a profit like parochial schools or those elite institutions which only cater to customers at the very highest end of the income scale. The powerful, powerful interests that work so tirelessly to maintain the status quo claim that fundamental changes would be too difficult and too disruptive. But consider this, and the kind of thing I'm talking about, the payment method would be the same. We would all continue to chip in with our tax dollars, as we do now, some a huge amount, some less, some a little, some not at all. The government would continue to be the collection agent, but not the sole supplier of the product. Instead, there would be multiple qualified suppliers, including the government, if they provided a quality product. Parents would be free to choose amongst all these suppliers, and funding would be allocated on the basis of their choices. So please remember, this was a right parents once enjoyed. It was taken away. Horace Mann started us down this path by proclaiming that parents should be taken out of the equation entirely, and that children should be considered, quote, hostages to the great cause of government schooling. What would happen if Mann's hostages were released? If parents were put back in charge of their kids' education? Well, let me suggest to you what would happen. Parents, as consumers, would demand quality, safety, and variety. Suppliers would have to utilize technology, innovation, and private investment to compete for their business. And the teaching profession would benefit as well. Yes, bad teachers would not make it, but good teachers would finally get the high regard and the much higher pay that they deserve. And perhaps most importantly, I believe that putting parents in charge would revitalize families. We worry about the dissolution of families, but we have reaped what we have sown by taking away one of the family's most important responsibilities and bonding functions. So here's the bottom line of what I'm talking about. Freedom, choice, competition. Equal opportunity for both consumers and suppliers. And as I look out at the room, I see some skeptical faces, and I sympathize. This would have seemed pretty radical to me as well when I appeared here almost 3 years ago with nothing more than a desire to help some underprivileged children. So I'll freely admit to you that with regard to the conventional wisdom on all sides of the so-called education debate, this is pretty different stuff. But let me make you a bet. I bet you that most of you will agree with me that what I've been talking about is very, very normal in the rest of American life, because I'm just talking about freedom. I'm really just talking about making K through 12 education look more like the rest of America, including our much admired university system. Freedom ought not to be on trial. The absence of freedom should be. The burden of proof ought not anymore to be on parents seeking their rights, but on those who would deny them those rights. We should all be seeking a system that educates the public, not continuing to live in denial about an anachronistic system we now have in which so many children are left behind. I'm asking you only to think about the possibility of a new day in which education would be more democratic, more creative, and more competitive. In a word, yes, so much more American than the system we have now. Thank you.
Now we do a few questions. This question would like to know, it says, if all children had the ability to attend private and religious schools, wouldn't the exodus overwhelm existing schools and cripple the remaining public schools?
I can only answer that by saying that whoever asked the question is rooted in the current model. When you have a free, open society and you have freedom of choice on the one hand and freedom to supply on the other hand, what you promote is quality. What gets left behind is lack of quality. And, you know, I can't predict what would happen to any given government school. I would assume that a lot of them will be able to compete, and I would assume that some of them won't, and I would furthermore assume that anybody without a hidden agenda of some sort or other that just wants quality for all children would say that's good, because the overall level of quality would have gone way, way up. But I don't start with the proposition of public, private, and parochial. The suppliers that I envision don't exist today. They exist, but they're not supplying. And they would, because this is a very, very big enterprise. The size of K through 12 tuition alone, no books, no buildings, nothing, just tuition, is $380 billion a year, which I will tell you is 2 times bigger than the whole telecommunications industry put together. And there's not a single competitive supplier in it.
This questioner wants to know, it says, your money is used to help students attend private schools. And you also mentioned that teachers deserve higher compensation. So who's going to pay for this increase in their salaries? Will tuition need to be raised?
Well, first of all, our money is used to help parents send their kid wherever they want, private, public, and there are no choices. So I hate to be repetitive, but there are no choices. And so if you take the current model, that yes, that we pay for them to send the child wherever they want to send the child. The answer to the second question is, of course, when you open the system up, assets get competed for. I'm surprised that assets are competed for, and good teachers will be valued assets. So if there's school A over here and B over here, and they will both be competing for the services of the good teachers, and the like anything else, the price of those services will go up. And what's more than that, the teacher will be able to teach. He won't be told. He won't be. My friend Guy over here has better ways of putting it than I do. But the teacher should be like a lawyer or a doctor. He should be able to teach as he sees fit. He shouldn't be treated like a government bureaucrat. It's not what teaching is all about. Finally, to this question, where will the money come from? On average, roughly, it costs a little under $8,000 to send a child as a national average to what I call a government school. On average, it costs a little less than $4,000 to send a kid to a private school. So there's lots of money. It's just where it's getting wasted now.
Given your feelings that you just suggested about teachers, this questioner would like to know what your assessment might be of the teachers' unions, the National Education Association and National Federation of Teachers.
Well, I'd like to say pass, but factually, Albert Shanker, who was the very famous head of the American Federation of Teachers, was an honest man. And he said 2 things that are very, very, very worthwhile, all of you hearing and remembering. First, he said, this system cannot be reformed because the only thing it resembles is a East European industrial model. East European, when the communists were running East. That's Albert Schenker. And the second thing he said was, our problem is not children. We represent adults, teachers. And he said, when children start paying union dues, I'll start worrying about children. An honest man.
Who do you see establishing the schools that will compete with the public schools in our country? Would there be enough profit involved to motivate entrepreneurs to invest in such schools?
Yeah, I think I just answered. It's a huge potential business. And imagine if we'd been here 30 years, I don't know, like 25 or 30 years ago, and I can't even explain it now, but 25 or 30 years ago I was trying to explain what could happen with the internet and the computer and Silicon Valley and so on. I mean, the names of these people weren't known then. That's what's great about a free society. Yes, maybe General Electric will want to get into school business. I don't know. But many of the suppliers will be teachers and principals and, you know, other people. And capital will flow because there will be a return on capital. And, yeah, there's plenty of money and plenty of entrepreneurial desire.
This questioner asked simply, well, why can't public schools simply copy the standards of private schools and enforce the same disciplines and save the country a whole lot of money?
I mean, that's, on one level, a very good question. I remember when I first got involved in this it was a long time ago. Cardinal O'Connor was the cardinal in New York, and I was having a breakfast meeting with him, and he said, I've just had a very disappointing meeting with the new chancellor of the New York City school system, whose name was Rudy Crew. He said, I offered him any assistance and any thoughts in any of our studies and anything, and he said to me, that will not be necessary. The only thing they should, but they don't. Monopoly, it's just not the way. It's just not the way monopolies work. If it were, we'd have them, and it just isn't the way they work.
Well, given what you said a moment ago, do you see in the future that we're going to have a Coca-Cola school or a Time Warner AOL school, a Disney school? By your suggestion of the GE, why not have those?
If they provide a quality education and parents as free people and consumers want to take advantage of that, then we should, along with a lot of other providers. There would be nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with anybody providing an education so long as it's of quality and so long as parents want it. And if they want it, whoever the providers are will succeed, and if they don't want it, they won't succeed.
Won't your suggestions do to education what HMOs have done to doctors? Aren't you trading government restrictions for corporate restrictions?
Well, this is a tough one. I don't know much about HMO and doctors, so I have to beg off that one. But no, I don't think so. I think I guess I've just got to answer that by saying that no system is perfect, but a system which is dominated by freedom of choice and freedom to compete is a lot better than anything else. And are there going to be lousy suppliers in my system? Of course. Of course there will be, just like there, that's the way. But theoretically what happens to them is they go out of business. And there'll be a lot less lousy suppliers in what I'm talking about than there are today. And apropos of the other question, I mean, you can reel off Coca-Cola and Disney and so on. You could also list some companies that are, a little bit less, that have less of the kind of image that those companies have. You don't know who's going to go into you just don't know who's going to do it. And as long as standards are met and parents want what's offered, look, if no free customer, with freedom to choose, wants to change, do you know what? Nothing will change. And we'll have the same thing we have today. What's anybody so worried about? All that we will have induced is we will have injected freedom into the system. And if people want to go to the same schools, which is, not going to happen, but if they do, nothing's going to change at all.
I have a couple of questions here. Would like to know what you consider to be the governmental role in education now. This question wants to know, in a society where many children's parents are working 2 or 3 jobs, who serves as the watchdog to guarantee that educational standards are being met? And this other question would like to know what you see as the role for state and local governments in establishing school standards.
I guess that I feel that parents, whether they have 2 jobs or what they have, are still the best. They're the fundamental part of the family unit, and they're the best judges of whether they like what's going on in the school that their children are at or not. I think the government's role is one of collecting the money and being a quality competitor if they can be. It's fine with me. I think it's great. If they can compete on a level playing field and produce the same kind of quality that others will for sure, well, if they can, then that's great. Then they can do that as well. But basically, there would be standards which should be fair and should point towards quality, and then multiple suppliers come into the arena and supply, and free people choose.
This question would like to know what you see as the limits on corporate power in terms of education. Is education deemed a public trust, or is it just a way to make a buck?
Well, my good friend Joe Califano got that question this morning and answered it very well. The government has a serious interest in the public being educated. I kind of wouldn't think in terms of corporate this or that. Most innovation and creativity does not come from big corporate entities, but from the genius of individual people. And I would look to people like Guy and Tom here and others. Frankly, I think that's where most of the supply is going to come from. That's my opinion, but I mean, that's what I think. I don't think that Coca-Cola is going to, as a matter of fact, going to do it. And let me answer the make a buck thing, because in a couple ways. First of all, in a capitalist system, there's nothing wrong with making a profit on a product that is a quality product and that people want, number one. Number two, let me assure you that while there is no, Bill Gates in this scenario, an awful lot of people are making money out of the present system. And I would love to meet the person that wrote that question, because to think that lots of companies aren't making tons of money on the present system, the present suppliers of the current system, you either haven't thought about it, or you don't want to you don't want to think about it. They are. In addition to which, many people, I know in New York City, something like 25% of all the dollars that goes into education gets into the classroom. 25%. So that means that 75% are going to people that run the people that run the people that run the people that run the people that finally get into the classroom. Now, come on. Those people are not making millions, but they're making, for them, lots of money, and they want to keep doing it.
There's a couple questions here that deal with the Edison School. It said, this one asks, why are the for-profit schools like Edison having so many problems reaching parents and administrations? And the second one mentions that the fact that in New York, apparently parents have decided to bar Edison from 5 New York schools and are attempting to oust Edison from San Francisco.
You know, that's really an Edison question, and you know, I don't know much about it. I know Edison is one potential supplier, and I can't comment on whether they're good, bad, or indifferent because I don't know. So I can't really comment on that question.
Fair enough. This question mentions that U.S. students are often outranked on standardized tests by students in other countries. So they want to know, do these high-achieving countries rely on private schools and more school choice than does the United States? And if not, why are they doing better?
Well, my answer, and I don't really want to talk about other countries because there are other cultures and all kinds of things. I really think we're doing worse. I don't think they're doing better. I think we're doing worse. And I think that if we wanted to, and we wanted to do things the right way, and we wanted to open this up and let all the creativity and ingenuity that we have in this country get into this part of education the same way we've encouraged it in higher education, that these numbers would look very different. We'd probably be at the top of the list. But I am not someone, the reason I want to answer the question that way is I'm not someone who thinks that all these other countries are doing so phenomenally well. We're just doing a lot worse.
The worst of a bad lot, is that what you're suggesting? This questioner says that most Congress watchers believe that the voucher provision of the Bush education proposal is dead on arrival, that it's not going to go anyplace. Do you believe that? Do you think that it will be enacted either this year or next? And what are you going to do about it?
Don't sit down.
Don't sit down.
I have no idea.
Well, don't you have no idea what might happen? All right. This questioner wants you to name names. It says, from which cities have you and Mr. Walton received the most scholarship applications?
You know, I don't know, but I guess, you know, it's not a secret. I think probably New York is, but as a percentage of the qualified applicants, I used to know this. I really don't. There's 4 or 5. I know Baltimore is one. What are the 44% of every possible kid in Baltimore applied? So I don't know. You know, 33% of every kid in New York that was qualified applied. Detroit, I think, was very high. I really, you know, off the top of my head, I don't know. But the average was about 25% or so. Yeah, about 25% of every city we went to.
Do you have any follow-up information on how these kids are doing in school?
Yes, we do. And here again, this is not my forte, but we, geez, Doug is going to get mad at me if I get this wrong. We've retained a Harvard professor to follow these children, and he has done studies, and they have been published, I believe. Is that right? Yeah, and they show that these kids are doing very well and much better than they were doing in public schools. But I want to be quick to say that, I mean, that doesn't surprise me, number one, but number two, that's great. I'm happy about it. It doesn't surprise me, but what makes me happy is that 40,000 mothers got to exercise freedom of choice.
Can you tell us what your opinion is of the constitutionality of government aid to kids who are attending religious schools?
Yeah, I can. I think it's a total red herring. If there was a problem, it isn't government aid at all. First of all, it's our tax money that goes through the government and so on. But secondly, if this were a real problem, then the GI Bill could never have been passed. I mean, thousands of GIs went to Notre Dame, went to Yeshiva, went to Southern Methodist University, and many, many others. So the thing is a complete red herring.
Okay. And how would you propose to make certain that private schools are spending the public money in the right way?
Well, the right way is the way that the customers want it done. The same as I don't believe there is a right way from from on high. I believe there are certain standards at schools, safety standards, and most of which aren't being met today at all, by the way. But I believe there are certain standards that ought to be met. But no, I don't think there's anything better standard than that of the customer who says, "I'm out of here."
Do you plan to donate more money for additional kids to participate in your program?
Remember what I told you about last year. Well, actually, underneath that question is an incredibly important concept. I would love to help as many kids as I can. There are lots of other children's problems in America and around the world that I'm concerned with, and I'm only can do so much. But there's a very important philosophical point. If I had $1 billion to give to this, or 10 billion, or whatever number you want, there's no place for these kids to go. And that's the point I tried to make about talking about New York. So if I did, yes, could we give more money, here and there and find where there are some seats? We could. And perhaps we will. But as a philosophical matter, if I, just had a huge amount of money and I wanted to give it to underprivileged children, there's no place for them to go. And that's a crime.
This question, I would like to know a little bit about you. And it asks, can you share with us the details of your own education, public or private school, and what role did this experience play in your current activities?
I went to Andover, I went to Yale, and I went to Columbia Law School. And right after that, I went into the Homicide Bureau of the New York District Attorney's Office, I learned more in a year in the Homicide Bureau of the DA's office than I did at Andover and Yale and Columbia Law School, multiplied by 100. And I must tell you that my education plays no role in what I'm doing now, and hopefully got me to be somewhat educated, but it doesn't play any direct role in what I'm doing now at all.
Will your new organization, Parents in Charge, be lobbying Congress for a school voucher program?
No. I don't know how to, no, absolutely not, no. We are not about vouchers, and quite honestly, we're not about lobbying. So, no. We are about, first of all, we'll find out how aware parents really are of their rights, and our survey seems to suggest that they have a big desire. How aware they are of what they actually can do or what used to be their rights, I don't know, but we're going to do a big national campaign, and we'll try to make them as aware as possible, and the goal of this organization is to, in a reasonable period of time, have a large group of American parents saying and meaning it, and that we want to be in charge of the education of our children. And if we get to that, we're not doing any lobbying of anybody at all, and we don't espouse vouchers or not or anything. We're for freedom of choice of parents and the correlative necessity of freedom for potential suppliers to meet those choices.
I take it that was a no. Before asking the last question, I would like to present you with a certificate of appreciation for your appearance here today at the National Press Club.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And also a National Press Club mug that we use for a variety of things, and your choice. And I have two last questions I'd like to ask you. One deals with your production of Boys of Summer, and the other deals with your decision not to run for the Senate. Why did you decide not to run for the Senate? And then finishing up by telling us who was your favorite Dodger.
Okay. Thank you. I was, when Mayor Giuliani announced that he was not going to run, I received what seemed like millions of telephone calls asking me to consider doing it. And the only reason that I gave it any real consideration at all was that I wanted to actually, I could imagine a debate in which I was able to ask Mrs. Clinton, I'll answer any question that you ask me, yes or no, if you will answer one question, but just yes or no. Do you believe that parents should be in charge of their education of their children, yes or no? And after, that was my dream. And after thinking about it for a while, I said I can do so much more this way than that way, that that's really why I decided not to run, because this has become my passion. With respect to the Boys of Summer?
Boys of Summer and your favorite Dodger.
The Boys of Summer and my favorite Dodger. Boy, that's hard. My favorite Dodger is kind of a funny one. It's Billy Cox. And I love Jackie Robinson. I love Pee Wee Reese. I love Gil Hodges. I love Roy Campanella, Don Newcomb, George Shuba, Duke Snyder. But my favorite Dodger was Billy Cox. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you all for coming today. I'd also like to thank the National Press Club staff members, Melinda Cook, Pat. Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Richard Ryan, and I am Senior Washington Correspondent for the Detroit News and President of the National Press Club. I'd like to welcome club members and their guests in the audience today, and those of you who are watching on C-SPAN or listening to this program on National Public Radio. The video archive of today's luncheon is provided by Connect Live and is available through the National Press Club website at press.org. National Press Club luncheons are also carried live by many sites on the World Wide Web. Press Club members may also access transcripts of our luncheons at our website. Non-members may purchase transcripts, audio, and videotapes by calling 1-888-343-1940. Before introducing our head table, I'd like to remind our members of future speakers. On Tuesday, April the 10th, Joel Klein, who was the former Assistant Attorney General for the Antitrust Division in the U.S. Department of Justice, will speak on antitrust enforcement in the global economy. On Wednesday, April the 11th, John Walton of Walmart, Mr. Forstmann has established the Children's Scholarship Fund to provide monies to help educate the children of low-income families. He has put up $100 million of his own money for the program, which allows parents to choose what school, private, parochial, or public, to send their children. In 1999, the Children's Scholarship Fund provided school tuition for more than 40,000 kids. But parents of more than 1.2 million low-income children had applied for the grants. Mr. Forstmann wants to change public education as we know it. He thinks our educational system is a monopolistic one that leaves parents out of the decision-making and shortchanges their children. He recently launched Parents in Charge, a nonpartisan organization dedicated to promoting a competitive educational environment in which parents are in charge of their children's education and all children have an equal access to a quality education. And Mr. Forstmann is willing to put up his own money to prove his point. And he certainly got the money. According to Forbes magazine, Mr. Forstmann ranks among the 300 wealthiest Americans. He is the founding partner of Forstmann Little Co, a New York-based private investment firm. Since its founding in 1978, the firm has made 28 acquisitions and significant equity investments. One of the best known was the acquisition of Gulfstream Aerospace. He purchased it for $800 million. He sold it 8 years later for $6 billion. Mr. Forstmann has been involved in helping kids for more than 2 decades. He began his involvement 20 years ago with the Big Brothers program. Since then, he helped establish a medical program for war-injured children in Bosnia. He has worked to relieve the plight of South African street children by helping provide them education, shelter, and medical care. He is the legal guardian of 2 such children. He has helped establish 2 camps for seriously ill children. He joined with tennis pro Andrea Jaeger to set up the Silver Lining Ranch in Colorado. He teamed with Paul Newman to create a camp in Florida for children with cancer and other life-threatening diseases. Now 60, Mr. Forstmann is a bachelor. His Majesty King Abdullah of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan will discuss Jordan and its role in the Middle East and its relationship with the United States. And on Thursday, April the 12th, Charles Rossetti, Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, will be our guest at the club. And for those of you who are keeping count, that's exactly 4 days before income taxes are due. If you have any questions for our speaker, please write them on the cards that are provided at your table, and please write in your best handwriting and send them up to me, and I will ask as many as time permits. And I'd now like to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly when their names are called. Please hold your applause until all head table guests are introduced. From your right and my left, Sumana Chatterjee of Knight Ridder Newspapers, Kathy Kiley of USA Today, and chairman of the National Press Club's Scholarship Committee, Jennifer Corbett of Dow Jones, Charlie Orenstein of the Dallas Morning News, Martin Luther King III, president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Frank Ockerfer, co-chairman of the Speakers Committee and a former president of the National Press Club. And skipping over our speaker for a moment, Bill McCarran, U.S. Newswire and Speakers Committee member who organized today's luncheon. Thank you, Bill. Guy Dowd, 1986 National Teacher of the Year from Brainerd, Minnesota. Judy Kronholtz of the Wall Street Journal. Thomas Fleming, 1992 National Teacher of the Year from Ann Arbor, Michigan. And Jack Nelson of the Los Angeles Times. Thank you. Imagine you had millions of dollars. What would you do with it? Buy a new house, a couple of cars, take a trip around the world? Well, our guest today, Ted Forstmann, has several millions of dollars, and he is using much of it to further his dream of helping educate America's children and to dramatically change what he considers to be the country's outdated educational system. Along with